All right, so Acolyte episode 7 just dropped, and this is going to be our weekly review, breakdown, and theory video. Unfortunately, Dean will not be here to join me this week, but he will be back next week for the season finale. And this entire episode is basically just a flashback giving us the actual story of what went down between the Witches' Coven and the Jedi. So we pick up on the Witches' planet called Brendok, where we find out the Jedi's main mission, the whole purpose of them being there in the first place, is they're looking for what they're calling a vergence in the Force, which is basically a concentration of Force power powerful enough to create life. So right off the bat, you kind of get the vibe that this is where they're going with how the twins were created in the first place, which was alluded to in a prior episode. Now, the whole reason that the Jedi are looking for this is because this planet or this system was supposed to be desolate, essentially, because of some sort of a cataclysm that occurred, yet there is life and nature on this planet. So eventually we get to the point that we saw in another prior episode where the Jedi do discover that a coven of witches is residing on this planet, and we get a little bit of a cheeky sort of Night Sister reference from Torben, I believe, but we, the audience, and the Jedi quickly point out that these are clearly not Night Sisters just based off of the way that they operate. So we go through the whole scene again of the Jedi initially approaching this witch's coven, noticing the twins, wanting to rescue them, and we get to actually see what went down when Torben was mind controlled by these witches, which I thought could have been a lot cooler. It seemed like the direction that they were going with that initially when first watching the scene was that Mother Anastasia was sort of tempting Torben in a way. He's whining the whole episode, wanting to go back to Coruscant, and it seems like she's almost, in a way, seducing him, similar to how like a dark side user would do. But there's really nothing too deep to that whole scene. It basically just ends up with her using that essentially to get into his mind, I guess. But it felt like there was going to be some sort of a pact or something made between them, or at least that's the initial feeling that I got watching that whole dialogue. Then we see the whole testing of the Force abilities of these twins again. They do a blood test, I guess, on both of them. Again, feels much like a callback to the Phantom Menace, testing the Chosen One, Anakin Skywalker. And, of course, these two twins, M count, which for those who don't know, they're referring to midichlorian count, is off the charts. And basically, Torben lets us know that they have identical symbionts, which they say would be impossible without some sort of manipulation of the Force. So this is basically just showing us the Jedi come to the realization that these twins were created. So Torben, realizing that this is the vergence that they're probably looking for on this planet in the first place, takes off on one of the speeders because, knowing this, he thinks if they discover what they came for, they can just all go home, which is what he wants, clearly, from the beginning. Sol then takes off after him on the other speeder. The other Jedi will soon follow them on the ship. And so then, again, we see the scene with May lighting the fire that ultimately brings down the entire facility, which still really makes absolutely no sense to me. The area where she lights the fire and the majority of that structure is all made out of stone, but the fire is eventually powerful enough to lead to blowing up some sort of a major technological source of power or something for that place, which causes the entire place to explode. And that being said, I really thought that was going to be more of like a metaphor, or maybe earlier on in the show we were being showed a scene that didn't necessarily happen, and that was maybe just some sort of a misdirection or something to basically mask what actually went down, or maybe a repressed memory by the twins to explain away the tragedy that took place there. Also, while on that topic, they played that up so much throughout this entire series, and for this entire episode to basically just be about that whole flashback scene, or seeing it from a different angle, essentially, the payoff really just wasn't there. What actually occurred, they play it up to be this huge tragedy, and the Jedi are sort of very guilty feeling about what took place. But in the end, what ends up happening is basically Soul, as the mother, is trying to what appears to be protect May in the scene, turns into her sort of witchly essence or something like that, some form of a spirit. And as she's attempting to do this magic, Soul stabs her. May witnesses it, which gives us the explanation of her hatred for the Jedi and her whole character arc, downward spiral. But really, that's the only sort of blood in my eyes that's really on the Jedi's hands here. The sister, the witches, excuse me, eventually do all pool their magic together to mind control Cal Naka, which was the only like slightly cool part of the episode. We get to see Cal Naka, the Wookiee Jedi, actually doing some lightsaber stuff. And you know, the fighting was decent. It's not. I have said that the fight choreography and the brutality of some of the action in this show I did enjoy. This wasn't necessarily on par with that, but nonetheless, it was still cool to see Cal Naka finally pull out his lightsaber. So then Indara finally pulls up, and she's able to clear the mind control from Cal Naka, which, from my eyes, looked like it only just knocked the witches unconscious. I'm not sure if they're claiming that that's what actually killed them because they were pulled out mid-mind control or something like that. But nonetheless, the entire facility does end up blowing up at a certain point, which would have led to their doom regardless. So that's why I say that the payoff for this huge atrocity that the Jedi committed, it just really wasn't seeing that. And again, we are on episode 7 of an 8-episode series, so that whole thing, which I felt was pretty clearly spelled out, there was no real plot twist to that, which I was kind of expecting or hoping that they would actually do, just the way that they, again, sort of played that up. But it basically was just like, here's what you thought happened, and yep, that happened. And that was what the whole episode was, essentially. And now we have one more episode to, in my opinion, wrap up a lot more things. And the other story arc in here, I think, is actually the more interesting one with Kimir and Osha now. And I wanted to see a little bit more of what I thought this show was supposed to be from a Sith perspective, and maybe seeing what sort of affiliation Kimir has to a Sith order or something along those lines. But we have one more episode to do all of that, and I don't know if what we're gonna get I will be satisfied with, to say the very least, honestly. Last thing I want to say before we wrap up this video is the end credits roll, and the song that they played is just an absolutely brain dead choice of a song. That song, I don't know what it is, or if that song has any sort of affiliation to some of the writers or anybody involved with this show, but that show does not fit in Star Wars, no matter what way you spin it. I'm sorry. On that note, we're going to end this video. We'll see you next week for the grand finale. Thank you for watching.